Yes, hello. I'm Professor Terry Marsden. I'm very pleased to be here at the University of Santa Cruz in the Department of Regional Development. I come from Cardiff University in Wales, the UK, and I'm director of an interdisciplinary research institute called Sustainable Places. And this is also linked to my professorship, which is in the Department of Geography and Planning at the same university, at Cardiff University. I've been there for 25 years, and for 10 of those, up until 10 years ago, I was head of school of the Department of Geography and Planning, which was originally called City and Regional Planning. So we have a lot of parallel interests in regional planning in Cardiff. My interests have broadened over the past decade, and let me say a little bit about the two areas of work which I'm involved in. I'll start first with the more specific, longer-running work I've done, which has been on agriculture and rural development. And I've written books on agriculture and rural development. In fact, the latest book was published in 2017 called Agriculture and Rural Development. And since my doctoral studies, when I studied family farming back in the 70s, I've had a long-running interest in agriculture and rural development. My latest work on agriculture and rural development has developed around this notion of what I call the bioeconomy and the ecoeconomy. And I was very interested yesterday when we went around a couple of farms in this neighborhood where we saw the farmers not only producing a variety of different food products, but also have constructed biogas plants on their farms. And this is a very good example of farming not only for food, and around here, of course, for tobacco, but also for energy. And my sort of work at the moment is on the realization that if we are to have a post-carbon transition off the dependency of oil and carbon emissions, which we have to do in order to reduce carbon and global warming, then it follows that we've got to obtain not only our foods, but our energy and water needs from the land. And therefore this places farming, traditional farming, in a very interesting position around the world, in the sense that there's going to be more demand from farming in the biosphere to produce these different types of resources. And of course, there's a limited amount of land, and there's more and more people. So how you feed 9 billion people and also provide them with energy, if you're not actually digging it out of the ground from oil and coal, but expecting to get it harvesting it from the biosphere, is a real question. So my work on rural development is traditionally on food systems, but it's also broadened into this wider nexus of energy, food and water, and the way in which farming can innovatively adapt to those sorts of concerns. And we're now doing work on what we call the circular economy, which is about closed loop systems for production and consumption of nexus products. So that's my core area of work. More broadly, as I've indicated there, I've also recently finished a large project which was to edit a 3-volume handbook on nature, the social science of nature. And this has led me into broader questions of what's called the Anthropocene, that is to say the period we're now living in, which has actually been developed really by the effects of man and woman on the environment. and the fact that to be sustainable, we're going to have to change the way in which we exploit the earth and modify that. So I have a broader interest which follows my directorship of the Institute, which has about 30 core staff and 100 staff from around the university who are members of the Institute from over 10 different departments, looking at the whole question of place and sustainability and how we can deliver and construct sustainable places through modifying the way in which we use resources. So we do work on sustainable communities, how you build sustainable communities, how you create more sustainable lifestyles in particular places, and to what extent we are seeing a transition to post-carbon living. That's become more urgent. It's said by the climate scientists that we only have about 12 years to significantly reduce greenhouse gas emissions in order to manage the increase in global warming up to 1% to 2%. Could be worse than that. So these are real issues, and it's often said the UK, for instance, is a small country. It only produces 1% of greenhouse gases of the world, but nevertheless you've got to start somewhere. But clearly it's also important to do work internationally, which I do. It's great to come to Brazil. I've been coming and working with Professor Sergio Schneider for nearly a decade now, one way or another, and developing our ideas and our collaborations around this big global regional and rural development agenda. And that's aligning itself, of course, to what are now called the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, 17 very challenging sustainable development goals about reducing poverty, improving well-being, eradicating food poverty, and making our cities, the areas where the majority of the global population now live, doing something about making them much more sustainable. So we've been doing work on sustainable cities in Southeast Asia and in China, because in many respects it's in places like that where the model of growth is still very expensive and wasteful in terms of the Earth's resources. And also we're discovering these cities are not the most healthy of places in terms of air pollution, food insecurity, and a variety of other issues to do with antimicrobial resistance. So city living in the 21st century is a really big challenge, because we've actually got to try to modify the city away from carbon emissions and transport, the electrification of transport as opposed to car use and lorry use, the reduction of pollution, improving the water quality, and improving the quality of the food that people are eating. So these are the grand challenges of the Sustainable Development Goals, and no one can achieve those on their own. And so our work is both interdisciplinary and what we call transdisciplinary. That is to say, we bring together academics, and we work with members of society, civil society organizations, state bodies, and work and co-produce our research with them. So it's a practical and applied approach to trying to resolve some of these environmental problems. Now, this places, I think, my final point, I think, is that this places regional development within a broader and more challenging context today than it did, say, 25 years ago when your department was being established. I think a process of what we might call ecologicalization, realization that we have to integrate ecology in with human processes like migration, like production. We have to link these into a wider understanding of what we mean by regional development. And that's something I'm going to be talking about here on Thursday in my talk, when I try to link regional development to this broader agenda, which incorporates, we can no longer, for instance, put environment over there and economic development over there and social well-being in somewhere in the middle. We have to bring these together, and place-based regional ways of doing this is a really important message. And so I've got very interested over the years in, as well as ecologicalization, the question of territorialization. And that basically, whilst we've, over the last 25 years, we've experienced both the benefits and some of the concerns associated with globalization, what some people call globalization plus and globalization minus. But we also need to recognize now that with the sort of trends and challenges we're facing that I've been describing, there is a case for re-territorializing many of our activities. That's not saying local is good and global is bad, but it is actually putting an emphasis on territorial management of resources, including human and natural resources, together to try to plan and work those through in a more sustainable way. So I'm very pleased to be in Santa Cruz. I'm very interested in the city. It seems to be a city that's modern, growing, and I'd like to know more about how this is what looks to be quite like a sustainable sort of place. I might be wrong, but it seems that it's got the potential anyway to be a sustainable city region in this area, and I'm looking forward to learning a lot more about that, because we can always learn comparatively how things can work in different regional contexts. So that's me. I could go on for another 3 or 4 hours, but I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.